Hello and welcome back to another Lingua Carpa video. I am Carp, your language teacher person. Today, I want to talk about using TV shows and movies for language acquisition because they are so wonderful, so awesome, and there are so many opportunities. First section is, welcome, hey, we did that part. Next, why TV and movies? Then who should use them? Probably most people, but we'll see. How do you pick the right TV show, series, the right movies? What to actually do with these besides just watch them and enjoy them, which you should enjoy them, I hope. And some limitations of what they can and can't do. They can't do everything, but they can do a lot. So why TV and movies? First and most obviously, they're engaging, they're entertaining, they're fun. Most people like some kind of TV show or some kind of movie, and when you want to study a language and stay at it, that is a great incentive. Let me do something that's fun that also helps feed into my goal. Something really important about these, especially if you're watching things that were created in that language, you can get a lot of culture from that. Say, instead of, I don't know, watching The Simpsons dubbed in Spanish, which you could do if you like The Simpsons. We'll talk about that in a second. Well, not The Simpsons specifically. We'll talk about watching things in dubbed languages in a second. But if you watch something that's produced in that target country or in that target language culture, you will get culture from it. And that cannot be understated, the importance of getting culture with your language. They're inseparable to many degrees, and that's for a reason. And it's good to understand that. So when I watch, for example, there was like this Japanese dating show where they put all these people and their exes in a room and then they had to like guess who each other's ex. I don't remember the name right now, but it was really fascinating because if you don't know much about Japanese culture, when you see the way that people speak and interact with one another, the way that their language changes, things like that, you will learn a lot. And that is part of it. If you expect to be proficient in a language, you must also understand a lot of unspoken cultural norms, body language stuff. This can help you with that. Along with that, and especially in the culture context, when you have TV shows and movies, you have a huge variety of situations and contexts. So you don't just get one form. Let's say, to pick an extreme example, if I only studied Spanish in a classroom, the majority of what I'm coming to understand is going to be pretty rigid, probably textbook-like language. Very straightforward, and it might be polite or professional sounding, but if that's the only kind of language I have, that's pretty limiting. And in movies and in TV shows, you could have anything from super serious, FBI, very professional, whatever kind of movie to a comedy or like an animated series. And that's very different from how people communicate in day-to-day life. But the point is, you've got everything in between. TV shows and movies also are good at building on familiarity in two ways. Let me explain what I mean. Thematically, let's use the crime show example. If I'm watching a crime show or a police show, I'm going to learn, because of watching that series and watching several seasons of the same series, I'm going to start to learn specific terms to that theme, specific terms about crime, or officers, or government organizations, or whatever that might be, because it's built thematically. That's super helpful because you get that vocab again and again and again. It also can literally build on familiarity. So another example of using or leveraging something you already know would be, like I mentioned Simpsons briefly earlier. Let's say you have a TV series like that, or maybe a movie that you've seen so many times. Most people have seen Shrek, have probably seen Shrek an unhealthy number of times, but the point is they know the story very well. When you are closer to beginner than you are to advanced or further on, watching things like that you are already familiar with is actually really helpful, because now you can sort of bridge the gap in understanding. Maybe you didn't understand every single word that was said, but you know the general story, and that sort of frees your brain up to relax and just rely on what you already know, and then take in the language as it comes to you. Now, you miss out there on culture and specific contexts, but you wouldn't just only watch things that you've seen. You would watch a variety of things. So there are different perks, I would say. It's mostly the same, but there are different perks for TV and movies. For TV, it's especially powerful building thematic vocab and learning communication nuances over long term. If you have a dating show, you're going to learn a lot about the way people talk about dating or relationships or romance, things like that. If you have, like I already said earlier, if you have a crime show, you're going to learn that type of vocab. You have a cooking show, you're going to learn that type of vocab. When it's a series, you usually have that in bulk couple of seasons of a show, you watch all that, you're really going to absorb that theme. With movies, I would say it's not quite as powerful because you don't have, if a TV series is hours and hours and hours of content across several seasons, a movie is shorter time commitment, which sounds funny because like one episode of a show is probably shorter than a movie, but it may be a short-term commitment to a theme or exposure to a theme without saying, now I feel like I have to finish 3 seasons of this show, which, on the large scale takes way longer. These last 2 points are probably my favorite. They can ease you into an immersive flow. When I say that, I don't mean you're going to, magically learn the language or anything, but when you're able to sort of take yourself out of the hot seat and stop feeling stressed about how much you're understanding or how well you're communicating, you're able to just sit there and let things happen and enjoy it for what it is. That takes all the stress away from your brain, and the lower stress you have, the easier it is to understand things and learn new stuff. It's a great thing to feel because if you've been studying language for a long time and all of a sudden you make it to the point where you're watching a TV series and halfway through an episode you go, oh my gosh, I forgot I was watching this in French, or I forgot I was watching this in Spanish. That is a great feeling because then you realize you're not having to mentally or manually process everything. You're just kind of getting it, or you're getting enough. Finally, it's an easy way to rack up tons of input time, tons of contact time with the language. You need so much time in whatever language you're learning. And when it's fun and you're seeing various contexts and you become invested in, a series or some characters or something, it is an easy way to keep going back to it and keep getting input and input and input. A quick side note, and this is very important, subtitles. So generally I would recommend to do this when you can watch it without putting English subtitles on. Your brain is very lazy. And if you are listening to a show in French and you're trying to learn French, but you got English subtitles on, you're probably automatically going to be reading those, and you're not going to listen and read that well at the same time. And the other thing, if the provider, wherever you're watching this, has subtitles for the show in that native language, that can be very helpful. But here's the tricky part. A lot of services will have the dub of the show and the subtitles for that same language, and they will not match up. This happens all the time, and I've checked this so many times hoping that they would line up. Sometimes they do. A lot of the time they don't. But you'll hear one thing, and while the subtitles may have more or less the same meaning, they will use different words. That can be confusing. If you find that they match, or if you just want something to rely on, it's okay to use those same target language subtitles, but be aware that they may be different. So who do I think should use these? First of all, probably not the beginners. I'm sorry. If you saw my past video talking about how to find the correct materials for your target language, you will understand. I think there's 2 main criteria. That's this. You need to find materials that you're interested in, and you need to understand them in a meaningful way. If you try to jump into a new TV series and you just started studying Spanish, 2 months ago, that's probably gonna be a rough ride. Even for people who are brand new beginners, even if you try to watch like an episode of Peppa Pig in Spanish or something, which sounds funny because you'd think, oh, that show is very simple and rudimentary and basic. It should be super easy. But the language is still, if you're actually a beginner, going to be too hard for you. You could try it if you want. So for the intermediates, you should absolutely start using these things. You should watch them for understanding. And I would say lightly study. I'll talk about what to do with them later, but lightly study these shows or these series to accompany your watching, to give your brain more to dig into, just a little bit. And of course, you should be trying to find things that are easy enough for you. If you are advanced or above, of course, you're still going to watch for understanding, but you want to do more with the content. And we'll get into that in just a moment. So how are you going to pick your stuff? Basically, interest and difficulty. Find things you're interested in, as I usually suggest. At least start with that and make sure it's challenging, that there are new things for you, but not so much that you're just going to be lost and get frustrated. Look for recommendations first. There are tons of people that have lots of recommendations for shows for people who are learning, or if you're advanced enough, just have recommendations for good shows. I do too. I love mini shows and movies on different online streaming services, but that's level dependent. Speaking of streaming services, check there first, because most people have something and most things have some content that you could watch. Disney Plus, Netflix, Amazon, all that stuff have different levels of accessibility and availability of subs, dubs, and series. Some of them divide those things in a weird way. I'm not a huge fan of how Amazon manages this. Sometimes their movies have completely separate listings if you just want subtitles or a different dub. Whereas, as I found on Disney Plus and Netflix, you can pick the dub and the sub from the same movie. You don't have to go find an alternate version. It's a lot more accessible. And then try stuff out, especially if you're diving into something that's completely unknown to you. Give it a shot, watch 15, 20 minutes, watch an episode of a show, watch a little bit of a movie. If you don't like it, if you're not into it, or if it's just too darn hard, don't feel pressured to force yourself to do it. Just leave. Find a different one. Go look for more recommendations, whatever. So finally, what do you actually do with these shows and movies? Well, you watch and enjoy them. It's excellent input. Before you watch them and enjoy them, you could really stand to gain a lot from pre-reading activities. I say pre-reading, we could call this pre-watching. It's the same idea. And that is, you're going to go find some information on that show or that movie on Wikipedia. You could even ask AI sometimes if it's well known, but you're going to try to find info on it before you get into it. So maybe it's totally new series to me. I'm going to look up, I don't know, the setting, maybe some of the main characters, a synopsis. I'm not going to look up a summary of the whole show. I'm not trying to ruin it for myself, but I want an idea. And I'm doing all of that in the target language. So if I'm about to watch Lupin, I love that show on Netflix. It's amazing. If I'm about to watch that, I've never seen it before, I will do some research in French on that show before I go watch it. And maybe take some notes on that. Maybe write down some of the main characters' names, where it's being filmed, or the outline of the story, things like that. And that way, when you go in, there's fewer unknowns. It makes it easier to understand because you'll already be a little bit prepared. Character profiles are another powerful thing that's very similar to pre-reading. You can do this a little before, or you can do it afterwards. So if you've got a show, then maybe after you watch a few episodes or a season, or you watch a movie, you watch the whole thing, you can create character profiles. Who was the main character? Write it down. Write about them, or tell somebody about it in the target language if that opportunity is there. Talk about who's in the movie. What are they like? What is their motivation? You can make as much of this practice as you want. Then you can get into deep dives. So if you're really fascinated by a series, you can get into all the stuff that is not surface level, like I want to learn about the lore of this universe. I recently watched the last season of The Witcher, the Henry Cavill one, because I'm not going to watch anything else after this because he's wonderful and now he's gone anyway. And that would be a world that I know there's a lot of info and lore behind. And if you're interested in that, go read more about it in the target language. Retells, you can retell something after you've watched about it. That's another helpful way to process it. And take all that language floating around in your head on whatever show or movie that might have been, and then put in your own words. Processing is very good, and for advanced learners, very necessary. You can always ask AI more about the show, whether it's like a pre-reading activity, or you could even ask them to, you can ask AI to do lots of things, like pretend that they're a certain character from the show, have a conversation with you. You could just ask them more about it. It's up to you. Once in a while, if you want, and depending on the difficulty, pause it and take some notes. I noticed during a few shows that I kept hearing the same phrases over and over again. And even though I'd heard it several times at this point, I hadn't figured it out and I never heard it before and I didn't know what it was still. Sometimes I would pause and look up that phrase right then just to bridge my understanding. And sometimes I would just make note of it and look it up later. Either way, it's another helpful thing to do with the content. And lastly, if you're into flashcards, I'm not a huge fan, but I use them sometimes. You can make that stuff about the things that you're watching, or you can find stuff that already exists. I know especially for Japanese, there are so many Anki sets that exist for TV shows and anime and things like that. So if you're trying to acquire vocab from a certain show, it might already exist, and you could download a flashcard set of, I don't know, 100, a couple hundred, 1,000 different terms from a show to help you learn it. So last thing, there's only a few limitations to these, is that, well, they're not accessible to most beginners. We talked about that. It should not be your full language diet. TV shows and movies are incredibly powerful and can make up a large amount of your diet because they can give you access to so much content. But they're not everything. They shouldn't be everything. You still will need to do, reading. You still will need to talk to people, things like that, but they can give you so much to work with. So they're great, but they can't be everything. Finally, they can require a very high tolerance for unknown. That is to say, if I'm watching a show and I understand the general plot and the general characters and the motives and things like that, but there's going to be a lot of in-between stuff that, language doesn't stay at a consistent complexity or difficulty. Sometimes it's easy while you're watching, and then sometimes they get into a complicated situation. That language becomes very hard very fast. It is what it is. So sometimes they can require you to just say, I'm okay with not understanding this whole chunk of this scene because I didn't. And you got to say, that's fine. I got a little bit from it, and I will understand it later, maybe, after I see the next scene. And then if that continues, then maybe the show's too hard. But you will have to have some tolerance for saying, it's okay that I didn't get everything. That's it for the TV show movie guide. If there's someone you know who's already interested in or is already learning a language, consider sharing this with them. Maybe there's something they can take away, some ideas that will get them excited about learning or practicing that language by being able to use TV shows and movies to their advantage. And if you guys have had any particular experience with using TV shows or movies for your own language study, let me know. What was it? What was it that you watched or that you enjoyed? Or what did you do with it? Maybe how did you find meaning out of it? Because personally, I know that I've leveraged this a lot, and I do it, well, literally every day. I'm watching TV shows and movies in another language as long as I have a little bit of time, because I think it's that powerful and I enjoy it that much. Until next time, everybody, hope this guide was helpful. Get out there, watch some shows, watch some movies, and enjoy learning the language. Ciao.